This is Platemark with me, Ann Schaefer. I'm an independent curator who focuses on works on paper. That includes prints, drawings, photographs, and books. Platemark is a podcast about prints and the printmaking ecosystem. When I say prints, I'm talking about fine art prints, usually limited editions, although not always. We're talking about etchings, woodcuts, lithographs, screen prints, that sort of thing. I'm trying to support the print ecosystem by introducing listeners to people who occupy various roles in the system. That includes artists, of course, but also includes printers, publishers, gallery people, museum curators, art historians, authors. It's my hope with this series to help people understand a little bit more what all these people do in these various roles. And we're going to share with you some stories that include and hopefully make more understandable some of the challenging technical bits of printmaking. I find people in this corner of the art world to be some of the nicest people you'll ever meet. It's a charming spot, and we like it over here. I like genuine artists who want to make genuine prints, and I want to get to know the genuine people who help those artists make those genuine prints. And that's why I'm here, and why I'm sharing all of these stories with you, helping you better understand why prints are so special and worthy of your attention. Not to mention that, of course, they are a terrific gateway into collecting because they're always less expensive than singular and unique works of art. My guest today is Judith Solodkin. She is the founder and owner and master printer of Solo Impressions, a great play on her name, Solodkin. I love that. She specialized early on in lithography. She was the first woman to come through the Tamarind Master Printer program back in the day, and she has continued to make lithographs up until the present. She also works in other areas as well, but most remarkably, she added some years back a digital embroidery part to her practice. There is lots of fabric stuff going on in the shop. And you'll be wanting to take a look at some of the hats that she makes and wears to various events around New York. If you've ever run into her at a fair or an opening, you can recognize her immediately because she's wearing a fabulous, unique hat. All right, housekeeping. I identify as a cishet white woman, and I use the pronouns she, her. I record Platemark in Baltimore, Maryland, the land of the Piscataway Conoy people. Images Judith and I talk about will be over in the show notes at platemarkpodcast.com. Also over there, sign up for our newsletter, and you can click through to the Facebook group. There's a bunch of us in there, and we talk about art. We show people what we're working on. We ask questions. We take polls, all sorts of stuff. So come on over and join the fun. All right, let's get rolling. Judith, it's wonderful to see you. Thank you for coming on Platemark.
I'm delighted to be here in the Bronx.
The Bronx. Why do they call it the Bronx? Why is that?
Because it's so special.
That's awesome. You have been on my list for a long time, so I'm thrilled we finally got to sit down and talk. Before we go too far, can you introduce yourself for the listeners?
Judith Solodkin. I'm a fine art printer. I print specialties lithography. I'm a Tamarind Master Printer. I also segued into digital embroidery. So I work with artists doing thread collaborations. And I'm also a teacher. I teach at School of Visual Arts and Pratt Institute.
And both. Good Lord. Wow.
Yes.
Are you teaching lithography at both of those places?
I teach lithography at both s3e and Pratt. But at School of Visual Arts, I also teach digital embroidery and soft sculpture, yeah.
Okay. Did you talk them into adding digital embroidery to their...
I absolutely did. In fact, I started their fiber lab almost 15 years ago.
Oh, my gosh.
And it's grown into this wonderful specialty. They now teach many classes using soft sculpture and fiber-related artwork, and it's the thing now. So
wow.
The students are lucky. They have wonderful sewing machines and a nice location to work in.
It sounds like they're lucky to have you.
Yes, I agree.
Good woman.
I'm not modest.
Okay, so you hold a certain place in the print world, which is very, I don't know, people, whenever I say I'm talking to Judith, they're like, ah! You were the first woman to come through the Tamarind program.
That's correct. I was there 1972 to 4, and I became the first woman master printer.
How do you feel about the term master printer?
I love it. I'm a master. I'm an expert, and I'm thrilled to be in that category. Although I have a friend, when I grew up, she used to write little limericks. And she said there was a young woman whose interests ran the gamut from teacher to temptress. She felt rainbow rolled when by Tamarind told she'd at last become mistress printress.
That's awesome. I've never heard that.
Well, it's unique to my friend Anne.
Oh my gosh, that's awesome. So before you went through the Tamarind program, well, how did you find the Tamarind program? How did this whole art thing come into your life?
Well, I majored in art in college at Brooklyn College, and then I got an MFA from Columbia University in fine arts. But I only took printmaking after I finished and got my graduate degree. I read an article in Art News about June Wayne and how she had started Tamarind in Los Angeles. And I was very taken with the whole ambience of the institute. I also have a very good friend, Joyce Kozloff, who June had invited to work there. And Joyce recommended me highly because at that point, I was I was teaching at the time, but I was also going to Pratt Graphic Center. And a teacher of mine recommended that I buy a roller, and then that segued into a litho press.
Oh, wow.
So at that point, 4 years after I graduated, I already had a printing shop.
I mean, that's a leap, let's just say.
Well, I wanted to be professional.
Okay.
I always admired musicians who were so expert in that they didn't think about the notes, but they just played music. And so for me, making prints had to be natural, had to be easy. Behind that came knowledge. In order to make it easy, I had to know what I was doing.
Of all things to pick, lithography seems to me to be the most challenging.
It is the most challenging, and it's chemical, which is unusual since I didn't fare too well in chemistry at college. But it's also like cooking, which I don't do very much, but I enjoy it when I do it.
Right. Yeah, no, I think that makes sense. Okay. So you grew up in New York.
Yes.
Which borough?
I grew up in Sheepshead Bay in Brooklyn.
Oh, okay. So where was your first shop set up?
I first worked after Tamarind. I got a job at Petersburg Press, and I printed a huge Rosenquist print called Paperclip. But Petersburg downsized, and I was let go. And so while I was at Petersburg, I had ordered my own litho press, my own brand hand printing press. So it was ready by the time I finished that job. And then I moved it into this very small loft. I mean, I had a little day bed on one side, and I had a press that took up most of the space. And lived and worked in one location.
So when you started, you were doing contract printing, or did you jump into publishing immediately?
I was mostly doing contract work. I always had to earn my own living, and I still do. I don't have any resources to fall back on. And I was teaching junior high school, then high school. I always had a job to take care of the nuts and bolts. So I just, and I was friendly again with Joyce Kozloff and other members of the AIR gallery, women-operated gallery. And they were publishing a portfolio in 75. And so I got to work with Nancy Spiro and Dottie Addy and Howardina Pindell. There were quite a few artists, about 6 artists that I worked with. And it was all contract work and lithography.
There's so many ways to go about a project like that. Did AIR say, artists go see Judith and work with her? Or did they say, here's Howardina's thing we would like to create into a lithograph?
No, it was very direct. They recommended me to the artist if the artist wanted to make a lithograph. Then they had about 5 artists who made etchings.
Oh, okay.
And they were simple prints, 2 or 3 colors, not very elaborate, 22 by 30. But they had gotten a grant. So it was a steady sequence of people working with me.
Yeah, that must have gone on for quite a while.
It went on for a while, but then at that point, I was also, I had a wonderful teacher at Brooklyn College, Philip Pearlstein, and his wife, Dorothy Pearlstein, had met me at some gallery openings. And she started 724 Print with her friend Nancy Meltzer. They were publishing prints. So I gave her a card and she contacted me. And so she gave me a couple of beginning jobs. Lois Dodd, Alice Neal, a few initial friends of hers, that were, and she wanted to make lithographs because Philip had made lithographs and she knew the process.
Right. My mouth has dropped open, people, because I did not know that Philip Pearlstein's wife was a print publisher. I had no idea. I've never heard this piece of the story.
Oh, well, I have lots of things to tell you during this time that you're going to enjoy researching.
Yeah, here's a little job for you. And
that's right.
I didn't know that. That's funny because a couple of weeks ago, well, months ago now, we talked to Carol Wax and she had worked with Pearlstein also and had nothing but fabulous things to say about him.
He was fabulous. He was a dear man, very dear person. And he was my undergraduate instructor. Brooklyn College was, a big city-run school. And there wasn't much of an art program as far as students go. But the teachers were wonderful because the teachers at the time needed jobs. So there was Jimmy Ernst, the son of Max Ernst, and Philip and Ed Reinhardt. And so if you were an interested art student, you had good resources.
It's hard to live in New York now, as you know, but boy, there was a point in time when you could just, trip over an artist walking down the street and they'd be your teacher in your next class. And it must have been amazing.
Well, it was a really eye-opener for me. Since I started college, I was 16. Oh. So from 16 to 20. So it was quite, malleable. And Ed Reinhardt, at the time I took classes with him, had 3 shows in New York City. And I had never visited galleries. And, it was just a door opened to this whole thing of galleries and the art world and serious artists. He frankly didn't come to class. It was so but nonetheless, he was a very good teacher.
Wait, how does that work?
Visually, he was unusual in that he would do it like a slide lecture, just visually. There was no talking. And so you would just have, visual references, one following the other. And they all came together if you had some understanding of what the visual, and they were all his slides. They were all talk about visuals. They were slides at the time.
Yeah, so, sure, of course.
And then he would add sense of humor. He'd put some weird things in to keep you alert. And of course, he was doing black on black paintings, and Pearlstein was doing all this figurative painting. So it was a big, issue of the time, and they would have talks together, which is more important and what's the future. And both lovely men, so it was an interesting conversation.
And who would win these debates?
I don't remember. They were just class discussions, and they would invite the teachers to this discussions. And most of the students went there to become elementary school teachers. At the time, I assumed there was no other option for me.
Right.
That was the only thing I could do when I graduated was become a teacher, and not even a college teacher. We would have to be elementary or secondary, whatever.
Do you make your own work?
At the time when I went to school, I did make my own work. When I got my press, I was making my own prints. Now the work that I make, and I'm going to show you an example.
She's up. She's going to do a show and tell. Yay!
Okay, here we go.
All right, what do we got? Oh, there it is.
So this is my work. This is my work. I make my own hats. And I make them because they're one of a kind. I call them overhead, but low overhead. And I don't have to sell them. I don't have to please an artist. All I have to do is please myself and wear them and enjoy making them. So that's my art. The art I make with artists is all collaborative and part of a whole other process,
Right.
which to me is very satisfying as well. But this is my own work.
Okay, so yeah, so for for folks at home, Judith is known in the art world for wearing a hat to every opening, occasion, fair, whatever, a different hat every day, and never the same hat.
Well,
Bang.
because you never see me daily, because I do repeat the hats.
Oh, okay. But when did you start making the hats?
I made them when I've moved my shop 6 times. And the next to last move was to the Starrett Lehigh building on 26th Street between 11th and 12th Avenues. FIT, Fashion Institute of Technology, was on my way back to the subway. And so I would stop off there and just take one of their continuing ed classes. I've always been fascinated with sewing and tailoring, and they had a millinery program. So I would take a number of millinery classes, and I loved it. I took so many that I basically set up my own millinery studio in my home to make the hats. I actually started wearing hats as a really young woman. The whole history of hats goes back to my mother, who wore hats. She was Orthodox, Jewish, and when we would go to synagogue, there'd be a sea of hats in the section where the women were allowed to sit. And so I was fascinated with the hats and not with the service. And then she would go with me to buy a hat. So it was a very relatable thing to my mother.
Okay.
And her personality was very conservative. So the only way she expressed herself was very unusual hats. And I loved that. I really enjoyed that, to see these like weird flower numbers on her head when she was so conservative. So it was very important to me to wear hats. I used to go buy them, but then I would ask the milliners to change them. And they were getting pissed at me. And also it was expensive. So then I decided, well, I ought to learn how to make my own. So that way I could add or take off whatever I needed and learn the basics for it.
I'm fascinated by the hats, I have to say, because you came to Baltimore last year for the print fair, and you came in one day, and this hat had like 16 little hands draped off of it. I was like, what? And I never got a chance to ask you what was the deal with the hat. I was like, what is going on there?
Well, I had once seen these plastic hands at, I think it was Museum of Art and Design in New York, when it was the Craft Museum. And I bought a bunch of them. And then I belonged to a group called the Milliners Guild. And we always have a competition. And the competition for that year was to use the hats of a famous milliner from Chicago who made very funny hats. And so that was the inspiration. And so I remember the hands, and I'm always caught for time. It's always, I have to really schedule everything in. So I remember that, and I thought, all right, time to assemble. And I put it together really fast, and there you are.
Did you win the competition that year?
No, but we did show them. We have this location in the Garment Center on 38th Street. It's a number of windows that face the street. And so we do an installation and we do a show. So it was in that show.
Oh, that's great. I feel like I saw a picture of you with some members of the guild, and I thought there was several Black women who had really big hats that we see here in Baltimore because of the Baptist tradition. And I thought there's such an interesting alignment in that tradition of women in the hats and churches and synagogues.
That's right. That's right. There's a really religious theme that runs through the hats. When you think of all the cultures in the world, the Pope has a special hat, and the king has, royalty. There's hats associated with that. Now we have, unfortunately, the red baseball cap. So hats have a very potent association. When you put one on, you can change your personality, you can perform, you can be alluring. Right now, we're doing a competition on Mildred Blunt, who was an unknown until we've resuscitated information about her. She used to work for Hollywood, and she did many of the hats for famous movies. And she wasn't given credit because she was Black. So she did the very famous hat for Gone with the Wind, where Scarlett takes a curtain and repurposes it as a hat and a dress. And so our theme was to find a famous hat in a movie and then do a contemporary version.
Oh, cool.
So we always have a theme. One year it was The Great Gatsby. It actually gives me an excuse to take time away from running my shop and having a business and have some fun making a hat,
Right. That does sound like fun. How long does it take to make a hat, really? Average.
This last one took me 5 days.
Oh, okay.
Steady. I'm talking steady 5 days.
Oh, wow. Because it's all hand.
It's all hand stitched,
Yeah.
and fabricated. But by now I have, like with the printing, I have enough skill to know or assemble, to know what I'm doing and what materials I want to choose and how to put it all together. So,
okay, so this relates very nicely with the aspect of your shop in which you're doing this digital embroidery part.
yes.
Yeah. So when did you start that in the shop?
Well, because to segue from the hats, I used to wear them when I was visiting Louise Bourgeois in her studio, and she loved them. She assumed I knew how to sew. But at the time, I really didn't know any machine sewing. I had only done this all by hand, although I had a sewing machine that my sister had owned. So Louise, we were working on this print called The Song of the Blacks and the Blues, which was a combination of wood block printing and Bourgeois and lithography. And it's about 20 inches by about 8 feet. So it's a huge piece. And she had all these little cutouts of these, I call them Michelin Man, these little puffy shapes. And she wanted to place them in different positions. So rather than glue them, she gave them to me and said, sew them on. So I had never sewn before. And I was taking this enormous piece of paper like an alligator and putting it on the machine and sewing it up. I didn't know any better. And I just sewed it up. I said yes to her. And that piece is now in MoMA's collection. So I learned fast how to sew on the machine. And when working with Louise, there was a project that was a very complex project called Eau de Oubli, which is a fabric book that she made with the assistance of her seamstress, who used to work in her basement, and put together all her old clothes and kind of collaged them together into this beautiful fabric book. And her assistant, Jerry Gorvoy, asked me, could I, and also Peter Blum, who was the publisher, asked me if I could make an edition out of the book. And of course I said yes. So a lot of the imagery was repetitious because it was an edition. And so then I thought, this is a great excuse to learn how to do digital embroidery, which was very new at the time. And so I taught myself the software and taught myself the machine. And it was a wonderful experience putting all that together.
When I first got to the BMA's print department, one of the curators, Darcy, I think.
Darcy
Alexander. Yeah, she bought the Elaine Rychek portfolio. Yeah.
Because I had showed at Cleveland.
Oh, is that where
they had their fair? Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. There was 2 series Elaine did, collections for collectors. And the collection that Darcy purchased was the one that had the Matisse in it.
Yes.
And I think the museum owned that Matisse.
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah. There was a thing where you would sort of go after things that were, centered around some aspect of the Matisse collection. Yeah. It was fun.
Well, at that point I don't know if I was still working with Louise with sewing. I may have, I don't remember the timeline, but I was starting to invite other artists to work with me using these new skills I had. because why, just stop, and I had this wonderful, expensive sewing machine. I wanted to keep at it. And Elaine, of course, is known for her own hand sewing. And she had a very early embroidery machine, and her assistants did some digitizing, but I worked a little more elaborately on her files and came up with these additions. So it was kind of a perfect match.
How do these digital things work? You just design something in Photoshop and off you go? Oh, okay. So now we've got the camera on the sewing machine. Look at that fancy thing. Wow.
And it's starting up.
Okay.
And this is one of the top of the line machines. And this sews an enormous amount of space. It's called the Epic 3. And it's just booting up. And then it's going to make some sounds. And what I do is I prepare a file on my, see now it's moving around, it's making sounds. It's called calibrating. Then in a second, it's going to light up. And it's basically a computer inside a sewing machine.
And are the files PDFs, or what are you throwing in there?
No, the files are proprietary files that are for sewing. They're special files and all the different sewing companies. And then it's telling me what hoop to put on, and there's a little design, etc. And then I get to sew it out. But I work on the computer quite a bit to digitize, to program the artist's image into stitches. And then I transferred Wi-Fi, actually. I transferred to my sewing machine, and then it's on the sewing machine. It's a lot of problem solving. All that's electronics and computer stuff is not, as you know, because you're running this podcast, is not automatic. You have to really do a lot of problem solving and a lot of tweaking to get it to. And then, of course, I have a whole selection of stitches and papers and fabrics, sizes. There's as many variables in this that there is in printing.
Oh, wow. Do you have to do like color separations?
Yeah. Although it's not as rigorous as lithography, which I can only print one color at a time, unless I do split inkings. Here, I have many threads, so I can do sequential sewing with different colored threads. It's one thread at a time. Okay. Yeah. I can't sew two threads at a time, even with a multi-head machine, which has many, many threads loaded up. You can only sew one thread at a time.
Okay. So once you put the fabric in place, it takes control and it maneuvers, or does
Then the hoop moves to the X and Y location of where the stitch is.
Oh my gosh.
And then I can program all these wonderful stitches. There's a whole variety of visual stitches that you can make. And it's just the needle going up and down, but the hoop is moving.
Gotcha.
Wherever you make your design.
So if you have multiple needles with multiple colors of thread, once you set it to do the one composition that's in multiple colors, it just goes.
Well, I don't have any multi-head machines anymore. Okay. I only have this gorgeous single needle, but it's for artists, I find this works better because I really can monitor exactly for example, I just finished a huge project. I signed it last week with Sonya Clark. Oh. She did sewing on paper, 47 colors. And the paper is 24 by 36. And any error on that paper would show. Because once you punch a hole in paper, it's going to show up. On fabric, you can take the thread out and no big deal. I really wanted to make sure I was watching it the whole time. I didn't want it to, rip or break a needle or anything.
But when you're doing that, do you do 36 sheets with the red and then 36 sheets with the blue? Or do you do the red, the blue?
No, what I did in that case was I divided, because my hoop was limited in size. I had an earlier version of this machine which sewed out a smaller area. So I had to divide the design into 6 parts.
Oh.
And then I had to register them
Right.
and sew them because I had to tile them together. So I would sew all the colors in each part and then go on to the next part and sew all the colors. So I would sew part 1 on, the edition is 30. So I think I printed, see, I do that all the time.
Of course.
I sewed out 40 sheets because, you know, you got rejects. So I sewed out 40 sheets and it would sew out part 1. And that would be like 3 days of sewing. And then part 2. And, you know.
With 28 colors.
I listened to a lot of Audible books.
Wait, you weren't listening to my podcast?
No, you're right. I should listen to your podcast.
It's really okay.
I'll do that for the future. I'll do that
exactly.
for the future. Yeah.
But how does the registration work?
Well, I'm a printer. So I know registration, you know, and registration is only 2 points. Registration is actually quite simple. You just have 1 point, which is your center, and then the second point is around the circle. And once you locate the second point, because I'm a printer, I add a lot of my printing expertise into this. So to me, it's a very natural segue. I will inkjet print large films with the image, with all the detail of the stitches. So then I have a transparency, and I can put the transparency visually over something I've already sewn to locate the 2 points that I need.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Thank you. That helps.
It's not magic, you know, it's really, and you can be so precise to the actual stitch dot.
Amazing.
And because I'm not anal retentive, I'm a printer, I am very precise.
Are there other printers who are doing this?
I'm not sure. I know there are other, I think fabric and fiber art is really having a renaissance. There was a show at Bravin Lee that recently closed called The Golden Thread. And a number of artists are doing hand-stitched embroidery, but some are also, you know, showing up with machine embroidered work.
But probably not as a collaborative printer, sewer, embroiderer.
Probably not.
Yeah.
Probably not. There are a few people that did kind of try it. I know Pace had somebody that they were working with that did a little bit of that. Maybe I had worked with Gada Amir and Reza Farkanda, and I think they did a little with Gada. When you talk about the financial side, it's a whole other issue. You know, whether it's makes sense to do this since it's very time intensive. And in terms of the market being available for this kind of work.
Right.
You know, once you start doing women's work, you've already cut the value down by, you know, astronomically.
Why do we still have this?
Well, it's the reality. You know, I did collaboration with Alan McCullen, a whole wonderful series of threaded shapes, Kent Hendrickson. So I've worked with a number of men who enjoy it just as much, but it's a conundrum. You know, it's always a conundrum, but I don't worry about it. It's something I'm enjoying, you know, and that's what I'm going to do.
Does the fancy embroidery machine cost as much as a litho press?
It's probably more.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's probably more. I still have a litho press here in my shop. I have a very small shop in Riverdale, which is separate from where I live. And it's a nice walk with my dog over here. And so I can print on the litho press. For example, with Sonya Clark, I did a lithograph with her. And then I did this companion embroidery piece with her. So I could put on my apron and grab a roller and print on the litho press, and then sit at the embroidery machine and sew out an image. So, you know, it's just a different station, and I just do something else at that station.
Do you have people come in and help you ever on projects?
At one point when I had shops in the Starrett Lehigh building and Broadway and Prince, and then I had a shop in Broadway and Spring, I had lots of interns, and then I had a group called My Soloettes. And at one point I had, 10 people For example, on the Louise Bourgeois book, I had a lot of people working on that project. And some of my former assistants have really gone on to become my colleagues, and very wonderful friends as well, like Becky Lax and Rodney Doyle, who worked with me for so many years, Nancy Bressler. Yeah, I mean, I just go on and on. But now I'm 79, so to have that responsibility of somebody's income, and also to keep to their schedule, to me is just too much to handle. I want to play more. I want to come in when I want to come in. And I'm enjoying it. At times, if I have to carry something or, I have to facilitate something where I need hands, it's difficult.
Right.
But I can sometimes find students to help me out.
Okay. Wow. What's your favorite part about teaching?
I like not being a dead end in terms of all this knowledge. I like to pass it on. And I have a sense of humor, so I like teasing them.
Kids are good for that.
Yeah, I love seeing if they are creative and if they interpret what I'm giving them in their own way. I also work them hard. I'm known for that. And I think they appreciate it. The ones that stick around, that aren't discouraged by my attitude, they become very adept at what I'm teaching.
Yeah, I've never taught. I mean, I've taught casually in a print
Mhm.
room in a museum, but I've never, the idea of teaching for a whole semester, having to fill that many hours of talking, like, I don't know.
I've developed a way of doing it now, so I'm comfortable with it. At one point, I hated it.
Oh,
So, yeah, when I was teaching high school and junior high school, I wasn't too happy at it because I wanted to be in the arts. I wanted to be making things. But teaching has always allowed me to pay Con Ed.
right. Con Ed. We love Con Ed.
Yeah, to pay the bills that are frequent, in that way. And also you are alerted to things that are happening, new things that are, the whole thing with fiber came about because I saw all these kids doing DIY stuff and getting into crochet and knitting and stuff. And I thought, that's something I know how to do. Let me work with them. That's how I started working with the soft sculpture, because I can use all different kinds of soft fabrication.
Yeah, but you really carved out a niche for yourself. That nobody's really doing this thing. If I wanted to do a project with, digital fiber of any sort, I would be like, Judith, you're my person. And it's, it just must, I don't know, must be gratifying to be the person.
I think what's gratifying is that I can use my knowledge to work with somebody. I'm not too keen on being the person, but I love education. I love learning things myself. And like I said, with lithography, I wanted to be so good at it that it was natural. So I'm very curious about materials, about fabrication, about tools, how to. To me, it's not all craft. There has to be an idea. But if you have an idea and it's a cogent one, a serious one, what's the best way to interpret it and to make it? And that's what I enjoy, is allowing my skills to come to the help of whoever needs them. And then to brainstorm. Like, for example, with Louise Bourgeois, if she asked me something, I'd always say yes, because then I'd figure it out. You say yes, and then I have this opportunity to learn something. So it's basically jumping off a cliff, but it's also expanding my knowledge. And then I can offer. And also, I think what's interesting, I remember when all these crafts that are taught, they always say the possibilities are endless, which I don't believe at all. I think for an artist, the possibility is extremely limited to what they believe. And you want to cut out all the extraneous noise and just get to the essence of what's important to them. So that the artwork isn't about the craft, the artwork's about their idea, but it's made well.
I like that. Say that again. Wait a minute. I like that.
Because there's always that push and pull between craft or art or all that nonsense, that discussion. But if you're an artist and you're making art, usually an artist doesn't really care about the materials, but they'll find materials that express their idea well. And so sometimes they call on a collaborator to help them out because they're attracted to concrete, for example, or, welding metal or whatever they don't know. And then the collaborator allows them to see their vision through. And some artists learn how to do that, become welders and become, sculptors. The craft becomes helpful to reach your goal.
That's how it's supposed to work.
It's not just advertising the craft, although that's a whole other category.
Deep. It's gotten deep in here, people. I mean, I always talk, when I was teaching young art students back in the day, like I would always talk to them about reducing the superfluous, like how little do you need to make your point, I guess, is really what I was after. Yeah. It's the same kind of idea.
It should be a natural part of what it is you're making.
Right.
And essential to it. For example, Elaine Rychek, she chose to work in fiber and fabric because the context of that was part of her idea. Mm-hmm. She worked with Ariadne, the theme of Ariadne and the thread and weaving and so on. Very thoughtful work. Or Alan McCullen, or I worked with Liliana Porter. I've done a lot of projects with artists using fiber.
I mean, I don't want you to name names really, but I want you to name names. Who's your favorite person to collaborate with?
Every artist is my favorite. It's like, asking who's your favorite child.
I know, but I had to ask.
It's always the one I'm working with, actually. Okay. It's like with your kid, it's the one you're talking to.
Yes, of course. Yeah. My friends always tease me because I never name a favorite because, of course, I don't have favorites, but I always say that my older one and I are more like personality-wise, which just makes the communication easier or whatever. Not that I don't love my other one who's more like his father, but it's just, you have affinity with people, right? Okay, so if you're not going to name a favorite artist, can you name one of the projects or one of the people who made you go, oh my God, I never thought of it that way?
I think every artist does that. For example, Howard Hodgkin, whom I did a lot of prints with in the 80s, these pretty major pieces that were huge, very large size, and they had a lot of hand-applied gouache and watercolor combined with litho printing. And, he would make decisions. This always interested me if I give an artist some options. And I thought, I know what they're going to choose, because I'm giving them this array of possibilities and I know which one they're going to go with. And of course, they don't go with that one. They turn it around or they think it through another way. And that's what makes them special, and that they have their own take on it. And then I learned something, and then I'm grateful because I now can see things through their eyes, and they've given me a new way to look. So I'm very appreciative of that. It's hard work,
sure,
but at least you're going back and forth. You're appreciated, but then they're always in charge. Otherwise, it's my work. It's not their work.
But I think that's something that people may miss about the printers, the master collaborative printers. People used to always say to me, how do you remember all this stuff? Well, it's accumulated knowledge. And so for you, having worked with all of these people, and each experience brings some kind of understanding of how they think or shifting, that your accumulated knowledge straight from the artists is so rich and so I feel like people forget to ask the printer stuff. You know what I mean? Like, you are the ones who need to be interviewed.
Well, I hope so.
Yeah.
I hope so. I hope there is and that's why I'm grateful to your podcast.
Oh.
At least you're taking the time to expose it and to have that as part of the record.
Yeah, I think it's important. And I continue. I mean, I've obviously love interviewing artists because they're the people around whom this whole thing swirls. Mm-hmm. But I love talking to the printers because I'm just so fascinated by the problem solving and the, the technical bits and how they help the conceptual bits. And there's just, it's also true that nothing would happen without you guys.
Yeah, I know there are many artists that like to what I call print around, where they they love working in different shops.
Sure.
And I'm sure their work reflects that they'll work one way with one shop and another way with another shop. And I think there should be more written about that.
Yeah.
About how the personality of the shop or the collaborative printer affects their thinking. And then they may bring that thinking to another shop.
Yeah.
And so I learned from them. Like when I worked with Michael Mazer, he did a lot of work with monoprints on his own. And he was extremely skilled in making monoprints, his own work. So he brought all that into my shop, and then I gained that information. So then when I worked with Françoise Gillot, I was able to do a lot of monoprints with her. And not necessarily the way he did it, but the way she would want to do it. And then sometimes when I started doing publishing, I essentially would choose an artist because it was the next thing that I wanted to get involved in. I saw prints that Ken Tyler was doing at Tyler Graphics with David Hockney doing paper pieces. I thought, oh, I love this. So I chose Robert Kushner, and we went out to Twin Rocker and made paper pieces. So if there's something that I want to expose myself to, I might choose an artist to help me on that journey.
I just love the relationship between the printer and the collaboration bit. It's so, everybody brings their strengths, and gosh, you can just, I don't know, it's magic.
In this talk, I don't want to ignore that I have almost 40 years of printing lithography. And then I also did a lot of letterpress because I had a letterpress shop. At one point, and Stack opened up copperplate editions in my shop, so I was doing some etchings.
Oh, gosh.
So at different iterations of my shop, I had different amounts of equipment. And then I produced, I either collaboratively did contract work or else I published. If nobody wanted to do contract work with me, I had to use my time productively. So then I invited an artist in and published the work. Then I became a distributor. And so then I also had a gallery. And then I had assistants who, helped me sell the work. So over those 40 years, there were lots of transformations, on different levels.
But wait, at 40 years, you're 79. So that means you didn't really, that doesn't sound right.
I started in 75.
Okay.
So it's almost 50 years. Yeah.
There you go.
Yeah.
I was going to say,
it's almost 50 years. Yeah.
Wow. So, but there have been some shows about you and your work, right? Did I dream that?
There were 2 shows at the National Museum of Women in the Arts, and I think the Worcester Art Museum in Ohio.
The College of Worcester?
College of Worcester, yeah.
Wait. Hold on.
Uh-huh.
I went to Worcester. Did you know that?
Oh, no.
Yes. It always comes back around to Worcester. It's hilarious. Yes, I went to the College of Worcester, graduated in 1986.
They had a very nice gallery.
Yes, they do. Yeah, I keep pointing people at it when I get random emails sometimes from whoever, artists or whatever, and I've inherited this collection from my dad, or we've been collecting this for X, Y, and Z. And do you have any ideas? And my list always starts with the College of Worcester for donation.
Okay, good.
Yeah. So when did they do a show for you?
1994.
Wow. It must have been Kitty McManus then.
Yes.
Was the director. Yeah. Okay.
Yes, that's right.
Oh my gosh, that's amazing.
Yeah, I mean, every year I have, like, for example, right now there's the Rosenberg Gallery in New York City. They're showing 3 of the Françoise Gillot monotypes. And so I just did a lecture at their gallery about working with Françoise. So there's always something up and on display. I just sent a whole selection of trial proofs to the Howard Hodgkin Legacy Trust,
cool.
Which they're starting a little museum in London. And so I had printed all these separation proofs of his work. And so I just created all that work and sent it out last week, thank God.
Oh, wow. How many pieces in total?
About 10
Wow.
and very large size,
Yeah.
40 by 60.
Oof.
And then there was some bigger ones, 44 by 72 or something. Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
Big prints.
Everybody has such wonderful documents of the process with these trial proofs and the notes the artist will write on it, change this, do that,
I think the
this.
Smithsonian has a collection of all these working proofs. And some of the museums do also. For example, the Jasper Johns trial proofs are so interesting. And they're, I think, at MoMA.
Yeah. And the National Gallery has a bunch also. No, it's true. Yeah, I find that part fascinating. And nothing teaches people better how things are constructed than showing them the steps.
And Rutgers University, I used to donate a lot of my work to them when they had their print archives.
Okay. Well, that actually makes me think about another question, which is, do you have a succession plan? Like, what happens?
No, and I'm a conundrum because when I have time, I really don't want to sit and document everything. I have a sort of generalized documentation, but I really need to do it in depth. What I want to do is make a hat.
Yeah.
So it's a problem.
It is.
And I know I've got to deal with it. And then also, if I don't make a hat, I want to work with another artist.
No, paperwork's no fun.
It's a yeah. I think about it, but and occasionally I reach out, but then I get distracted. I want to do something else.
Do you have a list of your hats? Is there a catalog of them?
I've documented them visually. Yeah, I have a general documentation of most of them. Also, it's fun because before Instagram and Facebook and so on, people would take photos of me and send me pictures. So I have a whole, like this fellow, David Glackens, who's kind of ubiquitous in the gallery world, where he goes to every opening. If I go to an opening, which is quite rare, he's always there, So he would always take slides and then send me, these free slides, send me slides. And I've become friends with him because it's so sweet.
Yes, that
he would follow me all these years and then share his images with me.
Yeah.
So that was his art, was documenting all the fashion stuff in the art world. One thing is shocking is that now when I read the New York Times, another artist I've worked with has passed, like Joe Zucker recently, and then a dealer, Ellen Srago. So these are my colleagues. And I worked with Joe, way back, 5 big prints. What can I say? It's sad, but, or Nancy Spiro or Leon Golub or Louise Bourgeois or, start going down the list of now artists who are no longer with us. And then all the context of all the prints that I've made with them.
Right.
So I don't want them to be disposed of, but yet I'm not exactly lazy, but I'm not exactly active in finding a place to make it happen.
But this sounds like a good job for a young art historian student type.
I know. I agree.
Paging City University, paging the Institute of Fine Arts.
Well, maybe this podcast will have somebody respond. Although I can't pay them. That's the issue.
Well, but if they're gathering information for their, master's thesis. Just saying. For people who are curious about the world of collaborative printing, and it's a perfect opportunity to, whilst you're making this pristine list of things that you are gathering so much information, I know you are busy and probably won't sit there and tell them your life story, but
yes,
they'll get a lot out of you, I'm sure.
Well, I had an assistant for about 16 years, Rodney Doyle.
I remember Rodney.
Because he worked so closely with me, I would forget an artist's name and he would always remember it. So it was wonderful because he helped me inventory everything and set it up. So he created a database. But Rodney hasn't been with me over 10 years. And so I'm not so precise on inventory. And so things have gotten kind of sloppy.
Well, so the student wouldn't be starting from ground zero.
That's right. Exactly. Exactly. No, we did do an overview and set it up.
Where's Rodney now?
He works for a fine art moving company.
Oh, okay.
And he's in charge of all the moving.
Okay.
Occasionally, he will text me an image that we've printed together that's at some collector's house, which is
Nice.
really fun.
That's awesome. That's so cool. All right. So what have we not talked about before we wrap up?
Well, I did have a gallery.
Okay.
I did have a gallery, and I'm looking back at the gallery. Solo press. I was solo press before 1992, from 75 to 92. And then I incorporated a solo impression. There was a show. Nancy Princenthal did Sense and Sensibility in 92. And Jim Kempner did a show, which I called Master Prints from the collection of Jim Kempner. Crime. Deborah Ripley did a show called Crime, Images of Violence. So I did a whole bunch of Christian Markley, The White Album, John Haydick, John Toriano, Kelmer Amalamid, Steve Keister, Howard Hodgkin, Robert Kushner, Bill Wegman, Ed Koren. So I guess I started that gallery in 87. I always had an extra room that I could, have works on display so that people could walk through and have something. And then I would hire somebody to sit on Saturdays so that we could keep it open.
As you look back on your career, are there things you feel like you should have done, or are you happily satisfied?
I'm actually very satisfied. The only missing link is the final chapter, is where the stuff goes. But besides that anxiety, there's always new stuff to do. I have this new embroidery machine, and would love to have another juicy project to use it for. I did a print last year with Judy Chicago, and I had worked with her at Tamarind. So I contacted her, and we did this print called What If Women Ruled the World, which was printed on, I have an inkjet printer too, a large size inkjet printer for fabric. So I printed her image and then I sewed on it. So it was a combination of printing and sewing, which I do a lot actually. A combination of fabric and stitching and printing. So I want to have, some more juicy projects. What I find perplexing is that I'm very vibrant and want to get into things. And there's a lot of ageism, which is kind of startling, but I can't do anything about it, And then the press interviews an artist like Betty Saar, because she's, 96 or something. And she just says, I get up and I go and make art,
Right.
I've worked with a lot of older artists like Alice Neal or Louise Bourgeois, and they just make art. You get up and that's what you do. And that's how I feel now. I just want to keep making things.
Right.
And learning things, and it's fun.
What about Audrey Flack? She seems like a...
Audrey Flack, I'm not sure. I know she does have a show, and Laura Einstein featured her work at the Met Museum Mezzanine Art Gallery. I don't know if she'd be interested in doing fabric production.
I don't know.
I'm not doing any more publications. So, because I figured the prospect of distributing it. So in that, paying the artist back for an issue you make. So if I did do anything like that, I would split it with the artist, because I can't be responsible for the future of sales. But I'm certainly open to contract work.
Okay.
So if you know an artist who's, I like an artist who's not actually working in fabric per se or stitching per se, but their work would take an interesting change if they moved over to another material. Mm-hmm. And they would see things a little differently. Right. That's an aspect that that I find fascinating. Although there are artists, of course, like Judy Chicago, who will be natural in terms of stitching.
Have you gone over to visit and tour Powerhouse Arts yet? Luther's shop?
Oh, yes. Luther is fantastic. He's a good friend. I really enjoy him. He gave me the tour of the whole building, and I was just blown away. They have one inkjet printer that actually coats the fabric before it prints it.
Right.
And it was enormous. It was something like, to me, it seemed like half a block long. It was so big. So I can't afford that kind of equipment. They certainly have a great vision.
Yeah. I mean, it did seem like they were doing some digital fabric-y things over there.
Oh, yeah. Oh,
Yeah.
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 And he, of course, in his silkscreen facility, he's doing amazing work, too.
So I had a friend who went through a couple of weeks ago and said that they had added looms and weavers
Oh,
are
wonderful.
in there now.
See?
Yeah.
You see?
Yep.
There's also a place in Brooklyn, Textile Arts Center.
Ah.
And I think they have a satellite space in Manhattan.
Oh, okay.
Where they do mostly weaving and knitting. They have equipment.
This is a world that I have not dipped a toe into, really, except for through people like you who are printed, the sort of cross between. And yeah, it's a whole other world out there, people. Oh my gosh.
People are always making things,
Yeah.
And now with, there's a show at the Met Museum, including Annie Albers. And I did prints with Beryl Corritt, who worked with early computer technology, and she did weaving, translating the Jacquard loom and the computer screen.
Oh, gosh.
And so we did a collaborative thing based on that weaving. It's always been there, except it hasn't been recognized.
Right.
And now I think the museums or Bard College has a show of Sonya Delaunay, of her beautiful prints and fabrics. I heard a lecture for Sheila Hicks. She talked about that show that's at the Met Museum. And I've always admired her work.
Mm-hmm.
Do you know her work? Sheila Hicks, look her up.
Yeah,
definitely. Alice and Jack Gallery, I think,
okay.
has a lot of very interesting artists who do this kind of work.
Okay.
I'm attracted to work that's serious, that basically takes, it may not be paint on canvas, but it's still, you're starting out with canvas. You're starting out with a woven material. And then,
right.
And then, it's thread on canvas.
Well, but thread see, this is the difference, right? The paint just sits on top and, it's like, I'm all that in a bag of chips, but the the thread has to integrate and really become a part of, right? It's a whole different.
Right. Or when you're weaving it, you're creating the canvas.
And that too, sure. Those painters can go jump.
Yeah, I hate the idea of pigeonholing,
Yeah.
For example, with the IFPDA fair. I know I brought my sewing machine there not this last two iterations, but the one before. And it was a little dicey for me because I didn't know how well they'd receive it because there's not ink on paper. But to me, it's still the collaborative process.
Right. No, that makes sense.
Like making a multiple. I remember there was a big brouhaha of making cast multiples. And then people were showing objects as part of the IFPDA fair. Right. So now they're questioning drawing as part of the IFPDA fair. But it's very hard to pigeonhole because artists do what they do, and they're not going to behave. They're just going to, something catches their interest and they're going to go for it.
Right.
And it has to be in the zeitgeist for you to respond to it.
Yeah. Did you meet Ivan Ford, who was, I think, Luther's first artist in residence before the last print fair in the fall, I think it was, the fall fair. I can't keep track. And he was working with photosensitive paper, and Nellie had sewn a suit jacket up for him that, as he made his way from Powerhouse Arts to the IFPDA fair that night, was changing according to his according to what light was hitting him and the body. It was fantastic.
It sounds wonderful.
It was so good. Yeah. Artists, you're right. They'll do whatever they want. But we need people
hopefully
like that.
They continue to, hopefully.
Exactly.
Yeah, the thing I object to printing sometimes is that it becomes so isolated. That you get this old printy shoppy thing where everybody's discussing, when they have shows at museums and they have all the tools and the copper plates and the ink and the roller. And to me, that's immaterial. If I go to a show on painting, I really am not going to look for the vitrine with the cans of paints and the brushes. it's nice to have an understanding of all that, but that's not the thing.
All right. Well, so people can find you. Are you active online so people can follow you on?
Not at all.
Okay.
Not at all. But it is Solo Impression, Prints, Prints, at soloimpression.com.
Okay.
And my website, I also, if there's somebody watching this who would love to help me revive my website, that's a big project that should be ahead of me to make it contemporary. It's really out of date now.
Okay.
Another time
Sink.
hole.
Yeah, exactly.
that would mean one hat less. So
right.
I'm actually just coming up for air because this last 2 years I was really so absorbed in the Judy Chicago and the Sonya Clark projects and teaching. I was lucky to get extra classes, so I was really teaching a lot. So I had no time for any other thoughts.
Well, with the website, the most important thing that you probably need to do first is have good digital images of everything.
I know.
Right.
I have good, decent images, but I think I have to rephotograph quite a bit.
A friend of mine and I rebuilt we built actually from scratch a website for our friend True, who does History of Prints with us. He'd never had a website before. And so one Saturday morning, we just went over and just, shuffled prints and took pictures with my phone and got it done. It was just, it had to be done. And there was no way he could do it by himself. You just had to all right, we're going to do it. Yeah.
That's right. Yeah, you need to be taken over.
Yeah.
I need to be taken over.
Right, exactly. All right. Well, that's a good project for somebody. Hear ye.
Yes, that's right. That's right. And by the way, the print behind me is Louise Bourgeois called Henriette. And that's a fabrication that's inkjet printed. And it's attached with a wire with a key on it. And supposedly you could undo the leg and make it move. And then the pink and the purple and blue are all lithographic printed.
Wow.
So it's actually a three-dimensional piece.
Nice.
And it was based on her sister, Henriette, who had a limp. And also after the war, the guards at the museum also came back with false, prosthesis. And it was also based on a sculpture she made and a photograph of the sculpture in a room.
Oh, okay. So
it's a complex story behind that print.
Right.
But love that print, and I always have it up. I think I showed it at the, I showed it at the,
in Baltimore?
Your art fair. Yeah. The Baltimore Art Fair.
Oh, yeah. It is beautiful. Judith, thank you so much for coming on Platemark. It's been wonderful talking to you.
Same here. We have to continue doing it.
It's true,
Our conversations.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Platemark with Judith Solodkin. I hope you enjoyed our conversation. She's a delight, and I just love those hats. So thank you to her for being a wonderful guest. It's always a pleasure. And also my regular thank yous go out to Dan Fury for being my sound and editing guy. Also to Michael Diamond for the use of his original music. And a thank you to Skip Barnhart and Lee Turner for sending me soundscapes from their studios that I use at the top and bottom of the pod. Images that we talk about are over on the show notes, as you know, at platemarkpodcast.com. Over there you can do a bunch of other things. You can leave me a voicemail message. There's a little microphone. Hit it. Let me know what you want me to talk about or who you want me to interview. And you can click through to our Facebook group and join the fun. You can sign up for our newsletter, and you could also become a supporter. Whoop. Shouldn't talk about money. Gosh, is that it? I think that might be it. Yeah, I think that's it. We'll see you next time.